Hi, and welcome to a basic review of ecosystem structure and food chain basics. So just as it states, basics. Just a real quick basic review on food chains, food webs, trophic levels, and ties in the idea of energy flow through food chains. I want to put this up first. Just remember ecology. When you study food chains, food webs, energy flow, you're really studying the ecology of a system. So we're looking at the connections in nature, how these organisms are interacting with each other, as well as with their environment. So it falls under the topic of ecology, kind of the how does nature work. When you study ecology, or when you study food chains, food webs, interactions, you really are studying an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is made up of living organisms that are interacting with each other and their environment at a given in a given area at a given time. So we watched a video about a scientist studying tide pools, and those tide pools would be an ecosystem. There were starfish, there were urchins, there was sea lettuce, I think, or like different kinds of algae and things in there, and those organisms were interacting with each other. They're also interacting with the water that was in the ocean, the rock that made up the coast. They were interacting with each other and their environment in that place at a given time. So the scientist was studying that tidal ecosystem. In the picture I have previously, and I have on the next slide, you're looking at a kind of grassland ecosystem. There's grass, there's prairie dogs, there are antelope, there are living things interacting with each other. Those living things are also interacting with their environment. The prairie dogs are interacting with the soil. Maybe the antelope are eating the grass. So they're interacting with each other and their environment in a given area at a given time, thus an ecosystem. All right. All ecosystems, whether it's a desert in one country versus a desert in another, or an ocean or tropical rainforest, all ecosystems have some things in common. They all have non-living parts, and the fancy word, abiotic. So bio means living. When you put the A in front of it, it means without. So the non-living parts. Basically, what's the climate like? Is it hot and dry? Is there a certain kind of humidity? What's the soil like? Is it an acidic soil, a sandy soil? Is there available water? In an aquatic, like an ocean or a river, there's still an effective temperature because water has a certain temperature, but there's also salt. Is there a lot of salt, low salt? How much light gets through the water? If you're very deep, the amount of pressure would be different than at the surface. The amount of light would be different. So those are the non-living parts of an ecosystem, but they have an impact on the things that live in that ecosystem. The living parts you're a little more familiar with are the biotic parts or components, the producers. Those are things that can capture energy from the sun, generally through photosynthesis. They can capture that energy and store it in organic molecules that are then available to things in the food chain. So I just think P, producer, photosynthesis, plants, just in general, keep it easy. Consumers are things that have to, we always say, eat. They have to obtain energy from an outside source. They can't make it or generate it themselves, we should say, or capture it themselves, like producers can. So primary consumers are basically herbivores. They're the things that eat producers. Secondary consumers, they consume second, so they eat the primary consumers. So we'd call them carnivores. And then tertiary eats third. So sometimes they're called top carnivores. They eat the secondary consumers. So kind of moving up the chain. And then every ecosystem would have decomposers, or sometimes called detritivores, scavengers, things that eat waste and dead stuff. So no matter where this ecosystem is or what kind of ecosystem it is, it's going to have these parts. It's going to have non-living parts, and it's going to have these biotic parts. Okay, this one there's a little confusion. Just remember decomposers, detritivores, scavengers. If you see that, let's say on the AP test, just know they eat waste and dead stuff. I guess technically decomposers are bacteria and fungus. I always think of them as bacteria, microscopic stuff. Where detritivores are the bigger things, insects and scavengers. They eat dead stuff and waste and return those nutrients back to the environment. It says matter and energy flow into, through, and out of ecosystems. So again, no matter where the ecosystem is or what kind of ecosystem it is, a tropical rainforest, a desert, they all depend on energy from the sun to power photosynthesis. They depend on energy moving through the food chain. They all depend on matter being cycled, like carbon dioxide in the air taken in by plants. That carbon then is packed into glucose, and then glucose could be broken down, carbon dioxide released. So all ecosystems depend on that cycling of matter and this energy flowing through. And food chains are really the way we illustrate really the flow of matter and energy, particularly energy. We do have carbon cycles and other cycles that demonstrate the cycling of matter, but food chain really demonstrates that flow of energy. So in every ecosystem, you're going to have food chains. I put this simple picture here just to show you, no matter what the ecosystem, you've got non-living parts, the rain, the soil, you've got the living parts, producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, and you do have that flow of energy, the sun to the plant, which is the producer, and then you've got the rabbit eating the plants, the fox eating the rabbit, that flow of energy, and then you've got carbon dioxide here, right, going into the plant. The plant then takes that carbon and packs it all together to make glucose. So you've got this conversion of matter, and then the plant could use that glucose for some purpose and give off carbon dioxide. So the cycling of matter. So no matter what the ecosystem, you've got all these parts, even the decomposers. And the food chains show the main flow of energy. So I just want to do a quick review on food chains. And I did them purposefully like bottom to top. It's often how it's phrased on the AP test. So down here at the bottom, we've got the producer, the thing that can capture energy from the sun, convert it into potential chemical energy that's stored in glucose that's then available to the squirrel here, which is the primary means first. It's the first to consume. In other words, it's an herbivore. And then along comes a snake that eats the squirrel. It eats second, so it consumes second. Sometimes we call them carnivores, but secondary. And then tertiary means third. Along comes the hawk, it eats the snake, it eats third, so it's the tertiary consumer. Remember, the arrows are always important. The arrow points at who's getting the energy. So the energy is going from the producer to the primary consumer. So the arrow always points at who's doing the eating, who's getting the energy. Just another simple example. In this one, I used kind of more common terms. So a primary consumer is also known as an herbivore. I think vor means to eat. I think it's Latin, so to eat plants. I think carne asada, right, to eat meat, and then the top carnivore. The same concept, just different terms. So then I added this, kind of a more elaborate food chain. This was from an assignment we did about the Sierra Nevada and organisms in the Sierra Nevada. And you see I've got 4 food chains. I'm going from left to right. All these food chains. Well, they're not just in isolation. If they're in an ecosystem together, you can also get a food web. So here, you've got the black bear, right? And the black bear, well, actually, algae is consumed by the caddisfly. Caddisfly is like a little, kind of a little baby dragonfly looking thing. The caddisfly eats the algae, rainbow trout eats the caddisfly, and the black bear eats the rainbow trout. So we've got a food chain here, and that black bear is a tertiary consumer. But black bears also eat sap, maybe from the sugar pine. So in this case, it's an herbivore, but it's connected to this other food chain, which in nature, that's the case, right? So in an ecosystem, a black bear wouldn't just eat trout, it would eat different things. So when we start interconnecting, a rainbow trout might eat a moth. I don't know for sure, maybe. Maybe a toad would eat a caddisfly, so on. Maybe a mountain lion would eat a chipmunk if it was desperate, right? And so on. So when you start to get all these interconnections between food chains, we call that a food web. That's probably more realistic to what you would see in nature. And when you say on the AP test, you're asked about a particular organism, like a black bear, be sure to follow this food chain. There's the black bear, and then I would follow this food chain. Kind of answer some questions about the black bear. That is a food web, many interconnected food chains. More. A little crazy. I did want to make sure I added the decomposers here. And you can see they're coming off like every, what we call trophic levels, the fancy word. So the producer trophic level, we've got the primary consumer trophic level, secondary consumer trophic level, and we've got the tertiary consumer trophic level. So coming from each trophic level, all of those things produce waste, all of those things die, and they would be broken down, their dead bodies or their waste, by decomposers into detritivores. So I wanted to make sure I added that in there. They're kind of, the way decomposers are kind of at every level, as you would say, every trophic level. This was some questions from the assignment we had done. I just wanted to make sure the arrows are meaningful. Right? The arrows show the flow of energy. They always point at who's doing the eating, who's getting the energy. At the bottom of the food chain, it's things that can capture energy and store it and make it available for organisms in the food chain. So generally, say producers, or things that can do photosynthesis generally. Things that can capture energy are at the bottom. So I put that here. If you look, I've got all these things here, and these are all, so that's an ugly circle, all things that can do photosynthesis. They can capture energy, store that energy in glucose, thus making it available for the next levels. So we've always got producers, things that can capture energy, at the bottom of the food chain. When you created your food, the food web, when we showed that food web, were there any organisms that were primary consumers in one and secondaries in another? So basically an omnivore, right? We have the black bear. So we said in this food chain, to the left, the black bear is a tertiary consumer, right? It eats the rainbow trout. But if the black bear eats sap from the sugar pine tree, oh, well now it is a primary consumer, it's an herbivore. So depending on the food chain path you're following, it may be a carnivore, well, I guess it's always a carnivore, but it may be a top carnivore, or like an herbivore, making it what we call an omnivore. It eats a little bit of both. More in there for you. All right, so a few more things just about matter and energy in general. Remember, matter, anything that has mass takes up space. So glucose is made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It's matter, it's molecules. Some examples of matter in nature, there we go. Carbohydrates, C6H12O6 is glucose. That is matter. Water, H2O, it's made of atoms, it's a molecule, it's matter, as well as air. A little energy basics, right? Usually we think of energy as the ability to do work, which I don't know if that's the best definition for us, but I always think of it as it moves matter. You know, energy can move the protein molecules in our muscles. It can do work in the cell. So it's doing work, it's moving matter. Some examples of energy, right? Kinetic, potential. So kinetic energy is actively doing work. Potential energy, we sometimes call it stored energy. I don't know if a physics teacher would say that's the best way to describe it, but for us, that works. Energy in nature, right? Sunlight, heat. These are ones that kind of fall into the purview of AP Environmental Science. Sunlight and heat are kinetic energy, and then there's potential energy, or what we call chemical potential energy, stored in glucose, or carbohydrates or fats. We call that chemical potential energy. So those are kinds of energy we'll be focused on. Don't know that I really need this picture again, but hey, there you go. And this is just a little really important concept that we beat over. I think I beat you over the head with this one. Every time energy is converted from one form to another, some of the original energy becomes heat. It's the second law of thermodynamics. And heat, we say, is a low quality energy because you can't eat heat, it can't feed animals, it can't power photosynthesis. But every time energy is converted from, let's say, the energy stored in glucose, and that's converted to energy to do work in the cell of a rabbit that ate the plant, some of it is lost as heat. And the rabbit loses that heat. It's not doing any work in the rabbit. And then if there's other, let's say, snakes in the ecosystem, they can't eat that heat. It can't power photosynthesis in the grass, so it's considered low quality. And a loss, something that just we observe again and again. We can't always explain why it happens, but that is the case. So because of that, there's a decrease in the amount of energy available to each succeeding trophic level in food chains because some energy is lost to the environment as heat. I've got another PowerPoint, some more slides that explain that a little more in depth. We did talk quite a bit about that. I just wanted you to remember that part. This was a picture from the book that illustrates that idea that if this caterpillar eats this grass, well, the caterpillar, it gets the glucose from the grass and its cells bust apart that glucose to use the energy stored in there to do work in the cells, or to make the caterpillar work. Well, when you convert the potential energy in the grass to kinetic energy to make the caterpillar do what it does, some energy is always lost as heat. Now, the robin can't eat heat, so it's lost. Heat can't power photosynthesis, so it's said to be lost to the environment. So I don't know if this is a great picture here, but I did my best. So if you remember that little plastic square that I always used, it was a 1 meter square. So I made this square, and let's pretend that this square is, I don't know, 1 acre of desert, I think I said. So yeah, this little square represents oh my goodness, so sorry, 1 acre of desert. If I got all the plants in that 1 acre of desert, I got all these plants, and I pulled them up, very nice, I pulled them up, took it back to the lab, and I used a calorimeter, and I was able to measure the amount of energy stored in the glucose in those cacti. Let's say there would be 1,000 calories per acre. So in this acre here, pulled up all the cacti, took them to the lab, measured the amount of energy. There's 1,000 calories of energy stored in that cactus in that 1 acre. All right. Well, if I did the same thing, if I went back to this square and I got all the grasshoppers and little insects that were in that 1 acre of desert, I took them back to the lab, and somehow I could measure the energy stored in their carbohydrates, and I don't know if they have a lot of fats, but maybe they're fats, and their proteins in their tissue. And I could mass it, measure the calories in it. Measure the calories in it. Scientists say I would only end up with about 10%. 100 calories of energy would be stored in those herbivores. So where did that other 900 calories go? Well, do the grasshoppers and the lizard, do they eat all of the cactus? No, so some is left behind. Of what they do eat, some of it they poop out, and it has undigested molecules in it with energy. And then of what's left, the glucose from the cactus that they actually do use, they bust it apart, they convert some of that potential energy to kinetic energy for the lizard to run around, the grasshoppers to jump. When you convert energy from one form to another, some is lost as heat. So only a fraction of the energy, scientists say about 10%, that was stored in the cactus in this 1 acre of desert, only about 10% of it is actually stored in the tissue of those guys per acre. The reason that's a big deal is that's the energy that's available to the secondary consumers. So as you go up the food chain, they say there's less energy stored at each trophic level. They often use a triangle to illustrate that. All right. There's some great references. I added some to the playlist, the Unit 1 playlist. I think I added the AP Environmental Science Bozeman one. It's called Energy Flow and Ecosystems. The Khan Academy's got some great stuff. So check out the Unit 1 playlist. I will add this video to it, and I've linked to those other videos as well. Let me know if you have any questions, text or email.